Hi and welcome to the Archive of History. It is just before dawn in a caravanserai courtyard somewhere between the known world and the edge of imagination. The air is cold, sharp with the scent of camel dung and wood smoke. Around you, the quiet rustle of merchants preparing for departure fills the darkness. You can hear the soft clink of copper bells being tied to harnesses, the low murmur of prayers in half a dozen languages, and the patient groaning of camels being loaded with impossible weights. Above, the stars are beginning to fade into a sky that promises heat, dust, and 1,000 miles of uncertainty. You are a merchant, and today you continue your journey along the greatest trade route the world has ever known. This is the Silk Road, and you are about to experience what it truly meant to live, travel, and trade along this legendary path. This is not a journey measured in days or even weeks. The route you have chosen will consume years of your life. You will cross deserts where men go mad from thirst, mountain passes where the air itself seems too thin to hold life, and cities so magnificent they seem conjured from fever dreams. You will meet monks and warriors, princes and thieves. You will taste foods your grandfather never imagined and hear languages that sound like music from another world. The goods you carry, carefully wrapped and loaded onto the backs of patient beasts, represent everything your family owns and more. You have borrowed against your future, pledged your reputation, and staked your very survival on the hope that distant markets will hunger for what you bring and that you will return alive to profit from it. Tonight we will walk this ancient road together. We will feel the dust between our fingers and the weight of silk bales on our shoulders. We will know the fear of bandits in the mountain passes and the relief of arriving at a caravanserai as the sun sets. We will learn the art of negotiation across cultures, the patience required to travel at the pace of laden camels, and the profound loneliness of being thousands of miles from home with only the stars as familiar companions. This is a story of courage and calculation, of dreams and desperate gambles, of the men who built bridges between empires one careful step at a time. Before we drift off, I am always curious to know where my listeners are tuning in from and what time it is that they are listening tonight. Let me know in the comments. And now, settle in. Close your eyes if you wish, let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to a time when the world was vast and strange, when distance was measured by the endurance of camels and the courage of men, when the scent of cinnamon could make a merchant wealthy, and the shine of silk could topple kingdoms. Our journey begins now, in the cool darkness before dawn, as you prepare to step onto the road that will change everything you know about the world. The path to becoming a merchant of the Silk Road does not begin with a single moment of decision. It begins in childhood, in the backrooms of your family's shop where you first learned to distinguish good silk from poor, where you watched your father's hands sort through spices with the practiced touch of a man who can tell cardamom from cumin by feel alone. You grew up breathing the complex perfume of imported goods, learning to recognize the particular gleam of jade, the proper weight of a bolt of silk, the honest color of saffron. This was your inheritance, not land or title, but knowledge. Knowledge of goods, of markets, of the intricate web of relationships that spans from the workshops of Changan to the bazaars of Constantinople. Your apprenticeship was long and demanding. By the age of 7 you could recite prices and measurements in 3 languages. By 10, you knew the names of the great trading cities, as other children knew the names of their cousins. You learned to read and write, not in one script but in several, for a merchant who cannot read a contract in Persian, Chinese, and Sogdian is a merchant who will be cheated. You studied arithmetic with a rigor that would shame a monastery scholar, for the calculation of exchange rates, the conversion of weights and measures, and the accounting of debts and profits is the true magic that turns bolts of silk into gold. But numbers and scripts were only the beginning. Your father, or perhaps your uncle, took you to the warehouses where you learned to judge quality with all your senses. You were taught to feel the weight of silk, to recognize the tight weave that speaks of excellence. You learned to smell spices, to know the sweet warmth of true cinnamon from the harsh bite of cassia bark, to detect the musty note that means age has stolen a spice's value. You crushed herbs between your fingers and touched their oils to your tongue, learning the language of taste that no book could teach. You examined jade in sunlight and shadow, learning to spot the hairline cracks that could halve its value, the subtle color variations that could double it. Languages came next. For a Silk Road merchant, its words the way a sailor needs stars. You learned Persian, the great lingua franca of the road, the language of poets and traders alike. You learned enough Chinese to negotiate prices and read official documents. You picked up Sogdian from the merchants who controlled much of the Central Asian trade, those shrewd men from Samarkand and Bukhara, whose network stretched farther than any empire. You learned fragments of Turkic dialects, enough Arabic to pray in the cities of Islam, enough Greek to trade with Byzantine merchants. Each language was a key to a different market, a different culture, a different way of understanding value and exchange. Your education included geography, studied not from maps but from the tales of returning merchants. You learned which mountain passes were navigable, in which seasons, where the good water sources could be found in the desert crossings, which cities were safe and which required extra caution. You memorized the names of reliable caravanserais, the reputations of local rulers, the customs duties charged at different borders. You learned which goods were forbidden or restricted, which might be confiscated, which could be carried freely. This knowledge, accumulated over generations and guarded carefully within merchant families, was more valuable than any single cargo. You also learned the subtle arts of negotiation and relationship building. You watched your father drink tea with visiting merchants, observed how he balanced hospitality with business, how he built trust over years of honest dealing, how he maintained relationships even when no immediate profit was in sight. You learned that a merchant's reputation was his most valuable asset, that word of a cheat or a liar could travel faster than any caravan, that trust once broken could never be fully mended. You learned to read faces and voices, to sense when a man was hiding something, when he was desperate to sell, when he was bluffing about his price. As you reached manhood, the practical aspects of the trade became your focus. You learned how to properly pack and protect delicate goods, how to balance loads on camels and horses, how to secure valuable items against both weather and theft. You learned basic veterinary skills, for a merchant who cannot recognize when a camel is falling ill or when a horse has gone lame will find himself stranded in dangerous places. You learned to cook simple meals over small fires, to pitch tents in wind, to navigate by the stars when the road became uncertain. These were not skills for wealthy lords but the essential practical knowledge that could mean the difference between success and death. The dream of wealth was always there, glittering like a mirage. You heard the stories of merchants who left with a single mule's worth of goods and returned with enough wealth to build a mansion, to marry their children into nobility, to fund the construction of mosques or temples in their names. These stories were the opium of merchant youth, the fuel that made the risks seem worthwhile. But you also heard the darker tales, spoken more quietly, stories of caravans that disappeared entirely, swallowed by desert sandstorms or mountain avalanches. Stories of merchants who arrived at their destination to find the market flooded, their goods worthless. Stories of men who made the journey once and came home broken, their health ruined, their capital lost, their families destitute. The decision to make your first great journey was not made lightly. It required capital, more than most families possessed. You pooled resources, borrowed from relatives, perhaps took on partners who would share both the investment and the risk. You drew up contracts, written in careful legal language, specifying how profits would be divided, what would happen if disaster struck, who bore which responsibilities. These contracts were witnessed and sealed, copied and stored in multiple locations, for a merchant's word might be his bond. But paper and ink were safer than memory. Choosing what goods to carry was an art in itself. You had to understand not just what was valuable, but what would remain valuable after a year or two of travel, what would survive the journey intact, what would find eager buyers at your destination. Silk was always precious, light enough to carry far and valuable enough to justify the journey. But silk could tear, could be damaged by moisture, could fade in harsh sunlight. Spices were small and concentrated wealth, but they could lose their potency, could be adulterated by dishonest handlers. Precious stones were the ultimate portable wealth, but required expertise to value correctly and could easily be stolen. Each merchant made his own calculations, his own gambles about what the distant markets might desire. And then came the moment of departure, the morning when you stood in your family home for perhaps the last time. Your mother pressed amulets into your hands, protective charms blessed by holy men. Your father gave you his final advice, words he had once received from his own father. Your younger siblings stared at you with a mixture of awe and sadness. not fully understanding that you might be gone for 3 or 4 years, that you might return a wealthy man or might never return at all. You embraced them, promised to send word whenever you could, though you knew that letters carried by other merchants might take a year to arrive, if they arrived at all. You walked through your city's streets toward the staging area where the caravan was forming, and every step felt heavy with meaning. You were leaving behind everything familiar, stepping into a larger world than most people could imagine. The life of a Silk Road merchant was not for the timid or the comfortable. It was for those who heard the call of distant markets, who felt the pull of the unknown, who were willing to stake everything on their own judgment and endurance. You were about to discover whether you were truly one of those rare individuals, whether you had inherited not just your father's knowledge but his courage. The caravanserai stands at the edge of the city, a fortified compound built of sun-baked brick and stone. It is still dark when you arrive, but the place is already alive with activity. Lanterns cast moving shadows across the courtyard, where dozens of merchants are preparing for departure. The smell is overwhelming at first, a dense mixture of animal musk, human sweat, leather, smoke from cooking fires, and the various scents of goods being loaded and secured. This is the staging ground, the place where individual merchants become something larger, a caravan, a mobile community that will live and move together for months to come. Your first task is to find the caravan leader, the man known as the caravan bashi. He is not difficult to spot. A weather-worn man in his 50s with skin darkened by decades under the desert sun and eyes that seem to look through you, assessing your worth and your likely survival with a single glance. He has made this journey perhaps 20 times, knows every water source and every dangerous pass, commands respect from bandits and local officials alike through sheer reputation. You approach him with a combination of respect and confidence, presenting your credentials, your letters of introduction from other merchants he has guided safely. He asks you questions, direct and blunt. What goods are you carrying? How many animals? Do you have guards? Can you ride if necessary? Can you fight if you must? Satisfied with your answers, he assigns you a position in the forming caravan. You will travel with a group of perhaps 30 to 50 other merchants, along with their servants, guards, and animal handlers. The total company might number 150 people, with several hundred camels, horses, mules, and donkeys. This is large enough to discourage most bandits, but small enough to move with reasonable speed and find adequate water and grazing. The caravan bashi explains the rules with the authority of a ship's captain. You will move when he commands and stop when he commands. You will take your assigned position in the line and maintain it. You will contribute to the common fund that pays for guards and for tribute to local rulers. Any disputes will be brought to him for judgment. Anyone who endangers the caravan through recklessness or disobedience will be expelled, left behind to face the road alone. The selection and preparation of your animals is a matter of profound importance. Camels are the great ships of the desert, capable of carrying enormous loads, able to go for days without water, resistant to heat that would kill a horse. You have purchased 6 camels for this journey, a significant investment. You run your hands over their flanks, checking for sores or signs of illness, examining their feet for cracks or infection. A camel that goes lame 3 days into the desert is a disaster that can cost you half your cargo. You check their teeth, their eyes, the quality of their wool. These animals are not pets or companions, but they are your partners in this venture, and their health is inseparable from your fate. Loading the camels is an art that requires both strength and precision. The goods must be balanced perfectly, equal weight on each side, or the animal will suffer and the load will shift and slide. You have packed your silk in wooden boxes lined with oiled cloth to protect against moisture. These boxes are heavy but manageable, and you tie them securely to the wooden pack saddles, checking and rechecking every knot. Your spices are in smaller packages, sewn into multiple layers of canvas and leather, each one carefully labeled in your own private code. You distribute these among all your animals, so that if you lose one beast you do not lose all of any single commodity. Your most valuable items, a collection of small jade pieces and some fine metalwork, you keep in leather bags that you will personally carry, never letting them out of your sight. The other merchants around you are engaged in similar preparations. Some are old hands, moving with efficient confidence. Others, like you, are making their first major journey, and their nervousness shows in the way they recheck every knot, every strap, every bundle. You begin to make acquaintances, for you will be living in close proximity with these people for many months. There is a Persian merchant with a magnificent beard who is carrying carpets, a Sogdian trader, small and quick-moving, who specializes in glass beads and semi-precious stones, a Chinese merchant with several servants, obviously wealthy, whose goods are wrapped so thoroughly you cannot guess what he carries, a Central Asian man whose face shows both Mongol and Persian ancestry, who seems to know everyone and greets the caravan bashi as an old friend. You hire guards, or rather, you contribute to the collective hiring of guards. These are hard men, professionals who make their living by protecting caravans. They carry bows, swords and small shields. Some ride horses, others camels. Their leader is a scarred Turk, who speaks little, but whose reputation, the caravan bashi assures you, is excellent. They do not smile, do not engage in the friendly chatter of the merchants. They position themselves around the perimeter of the forming caravan, already vigilant, even though you have not yet left the safety of the city walls. You have paid for their services, but you do not fool yourself into thinking they would die for your silk. Their job is to make the caravan too difficult to target, to ensure that bandits will look for easier prey. In a real fight, you understand, you will be expected to defend your own goods. The provisions you carry are as important as your trade goods. Water is life in the desert, and you load multiple large goatskin bags, knowing that they will be refilled at every opportunity. Food for the journey must be portable, durable and nourishing. Dried fruits, nuts, flatbread that will keep for weeks, dried meat, rice, tea, salt. You have cooking pots, a small brazier, fuel in the form of dried dung, which burns slowly and steadily. You have tents made of felt and canvas, sleeping rolls, blankets for the cold nights. You have rope, tools for repairs, needles and thread, medicines and herbs for common ailments. You have spare horseshoes, extra straps and buckles, cloth for bandages, fire-starting materials. Every ounce of weight is calculated, but nothing essential is left behind. As dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky, the pace of preparation intensifies. The camel drivers move among the animals with long sticks, making clicking sounds that the beasts recognize. The camels rise from their rest, first the back legs, then the front, an awkward heaving motion that makes the load shift and requires quick adjustments. The merchants mount their horses or position themselves at the heads of their strings of camels. The guards take their positions at front, rear, and along the flanks. The caravan bashi rides to the front on a tall horse, surveys the assembled company with a critical eye, and then raises his hand in the signal to move. The great gate of the caravanserai swings open. The city is waking now, and a few early risers stop to watch as the caravan files out. You pass through streets you have known all your life, past the shop where your father first taught you to judge silk, past the mosque where you prayed last night for safe travel, past the home where your family still sleeps, unaware that you are already departing. At the city gate, guards in official uniforms check papers, collect one final duty, exchange words with the caravan bashi that involve some laughter and the transfer of a small gift that is not quite a bribe but serves the same purpose. And then you are through, out onto the open road, leaving behind the walls and the familiar streets, heading toward the horizon where the rising sun turns the dust to gold. The caravan stretches out in a long line, 150 people and several hundred animals moving at the steady pace of laden camels, about 3 miles per hour, a pace that seems slow at first, but which you will learn to respect as you discover how it eats away at vast distances. The sound of bells fills the air, the bells that hang from the camels' necks and chime with each step, a sound that will become so familiar you will hear it in your dreams for years to come. Around you, the other merchants settle into the rhythm of travel, and you realize that this is really happening. You have left your old life behind. Ahead lies the Silk Road, with all its promises and perils. The first days of travel are deceptive in their relative ease. You are still in familiar territory, passing through lands you know, following well-traveled roads. Villages appear regularly, with wells and simple inns where you can purchase fresh food. The landscape is still green in places, with fields and orchards that remind you of home. But each day carries you farther from the known world, and each evening when the caravan stops and you help set up camp, you feel the subtle shift in your circumstances. You are becoming a traveler, learning the rhythms of this new life. The routine establishes itself quickly, because it must. You rise before dawn in the cold darkness, your body stiff from sleeping on the ground. You eat a quick meal of tea and bread, strike your tent, reload your animals, and form up in your assigned position in the line. You walk beside your lead camel, guiding it more through habit and gentle correction than through force, for a camel is a stubborn creature that will work with you if you work with it, but will simply stop moving if you try to compel it through violence. You walk for hours, perhaps 6 or 7 in the morning before the heat becomes too intense. During the midday, you rest in whatever shade can be found, a scattering of trees, an outcropping of rocks, sometimes just the shadow cast by your own crouching camels. In the afternoon you travel again, perhaps another 4 or 5 hours before stopping for the night. The location of each stop is chosen by the caravan bashi, always with an eye toward water and defensibility. When the signal comes, the long line of the caravan collapses inward, forming a rough circle with the animals and goods on the inside and the tents and fires on the outside. The camels are unloaded, watered if water is available, allowed to graze on whatever vegetation exists. You set up your tent, a simple structure of poles and cloth that nonetheless feels like home after a day of walking. You light your fire, cook your evening meal, perhaps rice with dried fruit, perhaps bread and tea. Evening is when the social life of the caravan emerges. Merchants gather around fires in small groups, sharing food and conversation. You learn the stories of your companions, where they come from, what goods they carry, what they hope to find in distant markets. The Persian carpet merchant, whose name is Reza, tells tales of Isfahan and its magnificent markets. The Sogdian trader, Khosrow, describes the splendors of Samarkand with such vivid detail you can almost see its blue-domed mosques. The wealthy Chinese merchant, whom everyone calls simply Master Li, speaks through an interpreter about the court of the emperor and the workshops where silk is woven by women whose skill has been perfected over generations. These conversations are not merely social, they are the education of a traveling merchant, the exchange of vital information about market conditions, political situations, new opportunities, and emerging dangers. You learn which cities are safe and which are currently controlled by hostile rulers. You hear about a new demand for certain goods in certain places, about a glut in the market for others. You learn which officials can be bribed and which are rigidly honest, which caravanserais offer good shelter and which are little better than ruins. This information, shared freely among merchants who are not direct competitors, is part of the informal network that makes the Silk Road function. The nights are cold, even in seasons when the days are hot. You wrap yourself in blankets and lie in your tent, listening to the sounds of the camp. Camels grumble and shift in their sleep. Guards move quietly around the perimeter. Someone plays a flute, a mournful melody that speaks of longing for home. Above, through the open flap of your tent, you can see stars in such numbers and such clarity that the sky seems dense with light. These are the same stars your ancestors saw, the same stars your children will see, the same stars that guide ships at sea and caravans across deserts. You think of your family, wonder if they are looking at these same stars, wonder if they are thinking of you. Sleep comes slowly, and when it comes, it is light and easily broken, for this is not safe sleep in your own bed, but the wary rest of a traveler in uncertain lands. As the days pass and the caravan moves steadily eastward or westward depending on your chosen direction, the landscape begins to change in subtle and then dramatic ways. The villages become fewer and farther between. The green of cultivated fields gives way to brown scrubland, then to bare earth and sand. The transition is not sudden but gradual, like watching the life slowly drain from something living. The trees become stunted, then disappear entirely. The grass becomes sparse and dry, then vanishes. You are entering the desert, that vast emptiness that lies between the civilized worlds at either end of the Silk Road. The first morning you wake to find nothing but sand and sky in every direction is a moment that changes something inside you. The city you left now seems impossibly distant, a dream of water and walls and human habitation. Ahead lies only emptiness, an ocean of sand frozen in waves and dunes that shift and change with the wind. The desert has a color you cannot name, something between gold and gray and white, a color that seems to absorb light and heat and give nothing back. The silence is profound, broken only by the bells of the camels and the occasional words spoken between travelers. In the desert people talk less, for words seem to dissipate into the vastness, meaningless against such scale. The heat arrives with the sun, building slowly at first, and then with shocking intensity. By mid-morning, the air shimmers and dances, creating false images of water and cities that vanish when you approach them. These mirages are not mere optical illusions, but cruel tricks of desperate hope, and you learn to ignore them, to trust only what is solid beneath your feet. The sand reflects and intensifies the sun's power, and soon you are walking in what feels like a furnace. Your clothing, which seemed adequate in the city, is now your protection. You wrap cloth around your head and face, leaving only your eyes exposed, for the sun can blind and the wind-blown sand can scour skin like a blade. The pace of travel in the desert is determined entirely by the endurance of the animals and the availability of water. The caravan-bashi knows the location of every well, every oasis, every place where water seeps to the surface or can be dug for. These locations are guarded secrets, knowledge passed from one experienced guide to another, for a false well or a dried spring means death. You travel from water to water, and the distance between sources determines how far you can go each day. Sometimes you travel only a few hours before stopping at a small oasis. Other times, you travel for days, rationing the water in your goatskins with desperate care, each person receiving only a few careful sips twice a day. Water discipline is enforced absolutely. The camels can go longer without water than the humans, and they are prioritized, for without the camels, nothing else matters. You learn to ignore thirst, to push the sensation to the back of your mind, to focus on the rhythm of walking, the placement of each foot in sand that shifts and slides beneath you. Your lips crack and bleed, your throat becomes raw, your urine turns dark and sparse, but you do not drink more than your ration, because to do so would be to steal from the collective survival, and the punishment for that crime in the desert is immediate and final. Expulsion from the caravan, which is another way of saying death. The heat of midday makes travel impossible. When the sun reaches its zenith, the caravan stops wherever it happens to be, and people seek whatever shade they can create. You drape cloth from your camels to form small shelters that block the direct sun but trap the heat beneath them. You lie in these stifling spaces, breathing slowly, trying not to move, for any movement generates more heat. The sand itself is too hot to touch. If you drop something metal, you cannot retrieve it with bare hands. Time seems to stop during these hours. You drift in and out of uncomfortable sleep, tormented by dreams of cool water and shade, waking to the reality of heat that seems solid, present, crushing. When evening finally comes and the sun descends toward the horizon, the temperature drops with shocking speed. Within an hour of sunset you are cold, your sweat-soaked clothing now clammy against your skin. You wrap yourself in blankets and sit close to small fires built from thorny desert shrubs that burn with an acrid smoke. The night cold is different from the day heat, but equally dangerous. Men have frozen to death in deserts, killed not by the sun but by the clear, dry nights when heat radiates away into a cloudless sky and the temperature plummets toward freezing. The nights in the deep desert are when you truly understand why the stars were humanity's first guides. Here, far from any city, with air so dry and clear, it seems you could reach up and touch the heavens. The stars appear in impossible profusion. You can see the great river of the Milky Way spanning the sky like a road of light. You can identify the constellations that guide travelers, the Plough, the North Star, the Scorpion, the Great Square of Pegasus. The caravan-bashi teaches you to read these stellar markers, to know which direction is east or west or north or south, simply by observing the wheel of the sky. You learn that different cultures have different names for these same stars, different stories about the figures they form, but all agree on their positions, on their usefulness for navigation. The psychological burden of the desert is perhaps worse than the physical. After days of walking through unchanging landscape where every dune looks like every other dune, where there are no landmarks and no variation, the mind begins to play tricks. You find yourself questioning whether you are moving at all, whether the landscape is real or some elaborate illusion. You understand why travelers speak of desert madness, why men have been known to walk away from caravans in delirium, convinced they see water or shelter in the distance. The guards watch for this behavior, for it is as dangerous as any bandit. You talk with your fellow merchants during the evening stops, and you discover that everyone experiences the desert differently. Some seem to thrive in its emptiness, finding a kind of peace in the simplicity of heat, sand, and sky. Others suffer visibly, growing thin and haunted, counting the days until they reach the next major oasis. Some pray constantly, reciting verses from their holy texts as a way to occupy their minds and maintain their faith that this suffering has purpose and end. Others grow silent and withdrawn, conserving their energy and their sanity through a kind of internal retreat. The occasional oasis, when you finally reach one, is a transformation so complete it feels like a miracle. You crest a dune or round an outcropping of rock, and suddenly there is green, actual living green, palm trees rising from the sand like impossible pillars. There is water, clear or muddy but real, pooling in natural basins or drawn from deep wells. There is shade, blessed shade, that feels like a physical embrace. The caravan descends on these oases with desperate joy, and for a day or two you rest and recover. The larger oases support small communities. People who have lived their entire lives in these isolated pockets of life surrounded by death. They grow dates and grain in small irrigated plots. They maintain the wells and the channels that bring water to the surface. They provide services to caravans, fresh bread, fodder for animals, repairs for equipment, news from other travelers who have passed through. These oasis dwellers are usually a mixture of ethnicities, communities formed from the overflow of caravans, people who decided to stay rather than continue their journeys. They speak multiple languages and follow various religions, but they share a desert pragmatism, an understanding that survival depends on cooperation and careful husbanding of limited resources. At an oasis, you restock your water supplies, filling every container to capacity. You let your camels drink deeply, watching their flanks swell as they take in gallons of water that will sustain them for the days ahead. You wash yourself for the first time in a week or more, sluicing away layers of dust and salt sweat, feeling almost human again. You eat fresh food, vegetables and fruits that taste impossibly vivid after days of dried rations. You sleep deeply, real sleep, knowing that guards are posted and that danger, while never entirely absent, is reduced. But the oasis is not the destination, merely a waypoint. After a day or two of rest, the caravan bashi makes his decision, and you move on, back into the emptiness. Each time you leave an oasis, it is harder than the time before, for now you know exactly what you are leaving behind and what you are walking toward. But there is no choice. The goods you carry are worthless here in the desert. They only gain value when brought to market, and the market lies ahead, beyond more days or weeks of heat and sand and thirst. Sandstorms, when they come, are terror incarnate. You see them first as a darkness on the horizon, a brown-black wall that seems to fill half the sky. The caravan bashi spots them long before you do. His experience reading the subtle signs, he shouts orders, and the caravan stops immediately, wherever it happens to be. There is no time to seek shelter, no shelter to seek. You unload the most critical supplies, gather the camels into a tight group and make them lie down. You crouch beside them, wrapping cloth around your face, covering your head, trying to make yourself small. When the storm hits, it is like being attacked by a living thing. The wind screams past with a sound that drowns out all thought. Sand fills the air so thickly you cannot see your hand in front of your face. The sand finds every gap in your clothing, works its way into your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears. You cannot breathe without inhaling sand. You cannot open your eyes without the feeling of tiny knives. You simply endure, holding on to your camel, trusting that the animal's mass will anchor you, praying that you will survive. The storm might last for an hour, or it might last for a day and a night. Time loses meaning in the howling darkness. When it finally passes and you emerge from your cocoon of cloth, blinking and coughing, you find the world transformed. Dunes have moved. The trail has vanished under new sand. Sometimes, tragically, you discover that someone did not survive, buried or suffocated, or simply lost. The caravan bashi counts his people and his animals, and then he determines direction from the sun or stars and leads the caravan forward. There is no going back, no rescue party for the lost. The desert does not forgive mistakes or bad luck, it simply takes. Through all of this, your goods remain your constant concern. Each night you check them, looking for any sign of damage. The sand works its way into everything, but your careful packing protects the silk and spices from the worst of it. You worry about the weight of the loads, for a camel struggling under too much burden will fail, and you will have to abandon or redistribute its cargo. You worry about theft, for even among merchants, the desperation of the desert can create temptation. You sleep with your most valuable items under your head, using them as a pillow, your hand always on your knife. And yet, despite everything, there are moments of strange beauty. Sunsets in the desert are spectacular, the sky turning colors you have never seen, deep purples and reds that seem to set the sand itself on fire. The silence during the calm hours has a quality of purity you find nowhere else. The stars at night are so bright they cast shadows. You begin to understand why desert peoples often develop such strong religious traditions, for in this emptiness, it is easy to feel the presence of something larger than human life, some vast intelligence that watches from the spaces between the stars. You also develop a different relationship with your fellow travelers. The desert strips away pretense. You see people at their best and worst. You see cowardice and courage, selfishness and sacrifice. Bonds form that would not form elsewhere. Friendships built on shared suffering. When you finally emerge from the desert, when you see mountains rising ahead or smell the distant scent of vegetation carried on the wind, the joy is collective and profound. You have survived. You and your companions have crossed the impossible emptiness together, and that shared accomplishment creates a connection that transcends culture, language, or religion. You are no longer merely merchants traveling in the same direction. You are survivors of the desert, and that is a brotherhood recognized wherever the Silk Road runs. After weeks in the desert, the first sight of mountains on the horizon brings a complex mixture of emotions. There is relief at leaving the sand and heat behind. But there is also a new kind of dread, for you have heard the stories of what awaits in the high passes. The desert tried to kill you with heat and thirst. The mountains will try to kill you with cold and height, and the simple brutal fact of gravity. You are approaching what travelers call the roof of the world, the great mountain ranges that form a barrier between the civilizations of China and India and the lands of Central Asia and Persia. These are the Pamirs, the Tian Shan, the Hindu Kush, mountains so tall they scrape the sky, so remote they seem to exist in a different realm altogether. The transition is gradual at first. The land begins to rise, gently at first, and then more steeply. Rivers appear, cold water flowing down from the heights, and the sight of running water after weeks of rationed drops from goatskins is almost shocking. Vegetation returns, sparse and tough at first, then richer as you climb toward the foothills. You pass through valleys where people farm in small terraced plots, growing barley and wheat that can tolerate the altitude. These valley communities are often ethnically distinct from both the lowlands you left and the highlands ahead, people who have carved out a life in this transitional zone, speaking their own languages and maintaining their own customs. As the caravan climbs higher, the air itself begins to change. It becomes thinner, lighter, somehow less substantial. You find yourself breathing harder with less effect, your lungs working to extract oxygen from air that seems insufficient to the task. This is altitude sickness, and it affects everyone differently. Some members of the caravan seem barely troubled. Others suffer headaches that feel like nails driven through their skulls, nausea that makes eating impossible, a bone-deep fatigue that makes each step an act of will. The caravan bashi knows the signs and knows the only cure is time and rest, allowing the body to adjust to this strange new atmosphere. He sets a slower pace, calls for more frequent stops, watches his people carefully for signs that someone is not adapting. The cold arrives as a surprise to those who have not experienced mountain travel. You have just spent weeks in desert heat, and your mind is not prepared for the fact that you can now see your breath in the air, that water freezes overnight in your containers, that you need every piece of clothing you own and wish desperately for more. The sun still shines brightly during the day, and its direct rays can be warm, even hot, but the moment you step into shadow, the temperature drops shockingly. At night, huddled in your tent with every blanket piled on your shivering body, you wonder if you will survive until morning. The paths become treacherous. In the valleys, you follow decent trails, worn smooth by centuries of caravans. But as you climb toward the passes, the trail becomes little more than a suggestion. A line of slightly less vertical rock following ridges and clinging to cliff faces. In places, the path is barely wide enough for a laden camel. To one side is the mountain face, rock and ice rising up toward distant peaks. To the other side is nothing, a drop of hundreds or thousands of feet into valleys where clouds gather. Your camels, those patient beasts that carried you across the desert without complaint, now become nervous and difficult. They can sense the danger, and their usual placid cooperation gives way to stubbornness or panic. A camel that decides it will not cross a particular section of narrow trail cannot be forced. and sometimes there is no choice but to unload it, carry the goods across by hand, and coax the animal to follow empty. You lose your first animal on the third day in the mountains. It is not your camel, but one belonging to another merchant, a young man who is making this journey for the first time just as you are. The camel simply steps wrong, or perhaps a stone gives way beneath its foot. It slides, scrabbles for purchase, and then falls, tumbling down the mountainside, with a terrible silence punctuated by the sound of impact against rocks. The merchant stands at the edge of the path, staring down at the tiny dark shape far below, and for a long moment no one speaks. The caravan bashi touches the young man's shoulder, says something quiet and brief, and then motions for the caravan to continue. There is no ceremony, no moment of mourning. The mountain has taken its price, and the only choice is to move forward. Avalanches are the great terror of the high passes. Snow accumulates on the upper slopes in quantities you cannot comprehend until you see it. Sometimes, for reasons no one fully understands, that snow decides to move. You might hear it first, a distant rumble like thunder, or you might have no warning at all. The caravan bashi chooses his times of crossing carefully, preferring early morning when the snow is still frozen, avoiding the afternoon when warmth might destabilize the slopes. But even with all precautions, avalanches remain a deadly lottery. Sometimes an entire section of caravan is buried, men and animals simply erased in seconds.
If you are lucky, you can dig out survivors.
More often, you lose people and goods, and all you can do is mark the spot with a cairn of stones and continue, for stopping in the high passes means death for everyone. The passes themselves, when you finally reach them, are places of stark and terrible beauty. You stand on narrow saddles of rock and ice between peaks that tower overhead, covered in snow that has never melted, will never melt. The wind here is constant and bitter, howling through gaps in the rocks with a sound that seems like voices, like warnings, like the keening of spirits. The views are overwhelming, valleys stretching out below, mountain ranges marching away to distant horizons, the world revealed as vastly larger and more complex than any map could show. But you cannot stand and admire for long. The high passes are death zones where humans cannot survive extended exposure. You cross quickly, pushing your animals and yourself to the limit, knowing that safety lies in descent, in returning to air that lungs can properly use. Buddhist monasteries appear in the most unlikely locations, clinging to cliff faces, built into caves, occupying small plateaus where no rational person would choose to live. These monasteries serve as refuges for caravans, offering shelter, minimal food, and the blessing of religious men who have chosen to spend their lives in meditation in these remote heights. The monks are often from various lands, for Buddhism's spread follows the Silk Road, and these monasteries are international communities united by faith rather than ethnicity. You are welcomed regardless of your own religion, for the hospitality of the high places transcends sectarian differences. Survival is a more basic truth than doctrine. In the monastery's sheltered courtyard, or in the cave temples carved from living rock, you rest for a day or two. The monks offer you tea made with melted snow and butter, a strange and oily drink that nonetheless provides warmth and energy. They share their simple food, barley flour mixed with tea to form a paste, dried fruits and nuts that have been carried up from the valleys. They ask little in return, though you leave what offerings you can, coins or small goods that they will use to help the next caravan. They tell you stories of the trail ahead, which passes are clear and which are blocked by snow, where landslides have changed the path, where water can be found. At night in the monastery, you sleep in rooms with other travelers. All of you pack close together for warmth. The monks chant their prayers in the main hall, a sound that echoes through stone corridors, a deep rhythmic murmur in languages you do not understand, but which sounds nonetheless comforting. A reminder that humans have found ways to survive even here, even in these impossible heights. You dream strange dreams at altitude, vivid and often disturbing, your sleeping mind struggling with the reduced oxygen and the stress of constant danger. Descending from the passes is in some ways harder than climbing toward them. Your knees and legs, already exhausted from the climb, must now absorb the impact of each downward step. The loaded camels lean back against their loads, and sometimes, despite all precautions, the weight shifts and an animal tumbles forward, rolling in a terrible chaos of thrashing legs and breaking cargo. You lose more goods on the descent than on the ascent, though fewer animals, for at least a camel that falls while descending might survive the tumble, unlike the long drops of the exposed paths near the summits. The first signs that you are leaving the high mountains bring intense relief. Trees reappear. First scattered pines clinging to impossible slopes, then proper forests of cedar and juniper. The air thickens, becomes breathable again, and you stop gasping with each exertion. Water becomes plentiful, clear streams running cold from snowmelt. You can drink without rationing, fill your containers without anxiety. The trail widens and improves. You pass through larger villages where food is more varied and abundant. You begin to feel human again, begin to believe that you will actually survive this journey. You have lost weight in the mountains. Everyone has. Your face is gaunt, burned dark by intense sun reflecting off snow, lined with new wrinkles of stress and exposure. Your hands are cracked and bleeding from the cold and the rough rock. Several of your camels are lame, and you will need to rest them for weeks before they can continue. 2 merchants in your caravan did not survive the crossing. One fell from a narrow path. His body never recovered. Another simply went to sleep one night in a high camp and did not wake up. His heart perhaps simply giving out under the strain of altitude and cold. His goods were distributed according to the contracts he had made before the journey, his share of profit to go to his family if they can ever be found and informed of his death. But you have survived. You and most of your companions have crossed the mountains, have descended into valleys where the air is rich and warm, where fruit trees grow and fields of wheat wave in gentle winds. The worst physical challenges of the Silk Road are behind you. You have conquered desert and mountain, have learned that the human body can endure far more than you ever imagined, that the will to continue can carry you through conditions that should be fatal. You look at your fellow survivors with a new understanding, a shared knowledge that exists beyond words. You have been to the edge of the possible together, and that experience has changed you in ways you will spend years understanding. The mountains have also taught you the true meaning of the goods you carry. When you were in the city, negotiating purchases, the value of silk or spices was an abstract thing, numbers in a ledger, prices in a market. But now, having carried these goods across desert and over mountain, having guarded them with your life, having watched men die while protecting their cargoes, you understand value in a different way. Each bolt of silk represents not just its weight in silver, but the suffering required to transport it, the risk taken, the distance covered. You understand now why goods that seem common in one place can be worth fortunes in another. It is not merely that they are rare, but that the act of moving them across such barriers, through such dangers, imbues them with a value that transcends their physical properties. As you descend into the valleys on the far side of the Great Ranges, you realize that you are now truly in a foreign land. The people here look different, dress differently, speak languages that sound nothing like what you knew at home. The cities ahead will be strange and wondrous, operating by rules and customs you do not yet understand. But you have learned that you can adapt, that you can survive, that you carry within you the resilience needed to face whatever comes next. The desert and the mountains were your initiation, the trial that transforms a city-dwelling merchant into a true traveler of the Silk Road. And now, having passed that trial, you are ready for the next phase of your journey, ready to enter the great trading cities where your goods will finally find their markets and your efforts will finally bear their profit or their loss. The caravanserai is perhaps the most essential institution of the Silk Road, more important even than the cities or markets, for it is the caravanserai that makes the journey possible. These fortified rest houses appear at regular intervals along every major route, spaced roughly a day's travel apart, positioned at crossroads and near water sources. From the outside, they appear as utilitarian structures, square or rectangular compounds built of stone or brick, with high walls that could resist attack and a single large gate that can be barred from within. But to a weary traveler arriving as the sun sets, a caravanserai is beautiful beyond description, a promise of safety, shelter, and human community in a landscape that offers none of these things naturally. The architecture of a caravanserai follows a practical logic refined over centuries. The outer walls are thick and defensible, with watchtowers at the corners. You enter through a single gate wide enough for laden camels, and immediately you find yourself in a large central courtyard open to the sky. This courtyard is where the animals are gathered, where they can be unloaded and watered, where they spend the night under the open stars but protected by walls from predators and thieves. Around the perimeter of the courtyard, set into the walls, are small rooms or alcoves, each just large enough for a merchant to store his goods and sleep. These rooms have no doors, just open archways, for privacy is less important than ventilation and the ability to watch over one's property. The caravanserai you arrive at tonight is typical of those found along the more traveled routes. It is built of sun-baked brick, its walls showing the wear of decades or perhaps centuries, patched and repaired many times. The courtyard is already partially filled with another caravan that arrived earlier in the day, their camels kneeling in groups, their goods stacked and covered with canvas. The well at the center of the courtyard is surrounded by men drawing water, the sound of the buckets splash and the creak of rope over wood somehow welcoming after a day of travel in silence. You claim an empty alcove, one of the last remaining, and begin the evening routine. The camels are unloaded with practiced efficiency, the precious cargo carried into your alcove and stacked carefully. You check each package, looking for any damage from the day's journey, making sure the knots and wrappings remain secure. Your animals are led to water, and you watch to make sure they drink adequately, but not too much, for a camel that drinks too fast after a day of travel can make itself ill. Once watered, the camels are hobbled and left to graze on whatever fodder they can find in the courtyard, supplemented by grain you carry for this purpose. With the animals cared for, and your goods secured, you turn your attention to your own needs. You light a small fire in the fire pit that every alcove contains, using dried dung or wood you purchased from the caravanserai keeper. The smoke is acrid at first, but quickly settles into a steady warmth. You heat water for tea, that universal drink of the Silk Road, prepared differently in every region, but always involving hot water, tea leaves, and some combination of milk, butter, salt, or sugar, depending on local custom. You prepare a simple meal, perhaps rice or noodles with dried vegetables, perhaps flatbread with preserved meat, perhaps just tea and nuts if you are too tired for more elaborate cooking. As darkness settles over the caravanserai, the courtyard transforms into a social space. Fires bloom like flowers in the alcoves around the perimeter. The smell of cooking fills the air, a complex mixture of different cuisines and spices. Merchants move between fires, greeting old friends, making new acquaintances, sharing news and stories. You join a group that includes several members of your own caravan and some merchants from the earlier arrival. They are traveling in the opposite direction, heading toward the cities you left behind, and they are eager for news of conditions on the road ahead. You share what you know. The desert crossing was difficult but navigable. The mountain passes are clear of snow at this season. Bandits have been active in a certain valley, and it is wise to either pay for extra guards or wait to join a larger caravan. A particular oasis has a new well that provides better water than the old source. A certain official in a certain city has become more demanding in his bribes. This exchange of information is conducted with care, for while merchants generally help each other with practical intelligence, they are also competitors, and no one reveals too much about their specific goods or their intended markets. The conversation moves to broader topics. Political news from the great cities, stories of which rulers are strong and which are weak, rumors of wars and alliances and succession crises. Market information, what goods are plentiful and therefore cheap, what goods are scarce and therefore valuable. Religious news, for the Silk Road is a highway of faiths as much as goods, and the merchants carry stories of new temples built, of famous preachers and teachers, of conflicts between different religious communities. Personal stories too, tales of successful ventures and disastrous losses, of merchants who left poor and returned rich, of fortunes made and lost in single deals. The Persian merchant Reza, who has become something of a friend during your weeks of travel together, tells a story about his first journey along this route 20 years ago. He speaks of arriving in a city with a cargo of carpets, only to find the market flooded with Persian rugs, the bottom fallen out of prices. He was faced with a choice: sell at a loss or take a gamble. He chose to continue eastward to another city, doubling his journey time and expenses, betting that the market there would be better. It was a desperate wager, and for weeks he did not know if he would be ruined. But when he finally arrived at that distant market, he found that carpets were indeed in high demand, and he sold his entire stock at prices that not only covered his losses, but made him a wealthy man. The lesson, he says, looking around the fire at the younger merchants, is that sometimes the greatest profits require the greatest risks, but you must learn to distinguish between calculated gambles and mere desperation. The guards of your caravan keep watch through the night, rotating shifts so that some can sleep while others remain vigilant. The caravanserai's walls provide protection from organized attacks, but they cannot prevent theft, and a merchant who sleeps too soundly might wake to find his goods diminished. You have learned to sleep lightly, one part of your mind always listening, always aware of the sounds of the night. The shuffling of animals, the quiet conversations of merchants who cannot sleep, the footsteps of guards making their rounds, these sounds are normal and expected. Any sound that breaks the pattern, any unusual movement, brings you instantly awake, hand on the knife you keep always within reach. The caravanserai keeper is an interesting figure, a man, or sometimes a woman, who has chosen to make a life in this isolated place. Some keepers are former merchants who tired of travel and used their savings to purchase or build a caravanserai. Others are locals who saw an opportunity to profit from the endless stream of travelers. They charge modest fees for the use of the facilities, sell fodder and supplies at marked-up prices, sometimes offer additional services like meals or guides or information about local conditions. The relationship between merchants and keepers is complex, a mixture of dependence and mutual benefit, for the keeper relies on the caravans for income, and the caravans rely on the keeper for shelter and provisions. Some caravanserais are elaborate structures with additional amenities. There might be a small mosque or temple, where travelers can pray. There might be a hammam, a bathhouse where for a small fee you can wash away the dust and sweat of travel, a luxury worth far more than its modest cost. There might be a market area where local people come to trade with passing merchants, offering fresh food in exchange for small goods or coins. The largest and most successful caravanserais become small communities in themselves, with permanent residents who make their living serving the needs of travelers. Morning in a caravanserai begins early, well before dawn. You wake to the sound of movement and preparation as the caravan that arrived before you begins to load up and depart. You take this as your signal to begin your own preparations, for the best hours of travel are the cool hours of morning, and no merchant wants to waste them. You eat a quick meal of tea and bread, load your animals, settle your account with the keeper, and wait for your caravan bashi to give the signal to move. As you file out through the gate into the grey pre-dawn light, you turn back for a moment to look at the caravanserai, that square fortress that provided a night of safety and community, and you feel a pang of regret at leaving, for who knows what conditions you will find tonight when you need shelter again. The pattern repeats night after night, each caravanserai different in details but similar in function. Some nights you sleep in structures that are almost palaces, with elaborate decorations and excellent facilities. Other nights you shelter in barely maintained ruins where the roof has partially collapsed and the well water is brackish and suspect. But even the worst caravanserai is better than camping in the open, for these buildings represent civilization, human organization, the triumph of community over the chaos of wilderness. They are the threads that hold the Silk Road together, the pearls on the string that connects distant worlds. In the great cities where routes converge and major markets flourish, the caravanserais reach their highest form. These urban caravanserais are massive structures, sometimes occupying entire city blocks, capable of hosting multiple caravans simultaneously. They often specialize, with different caravanserais catering to merchants from different regions or dealing in different types of goods. There might be a caravanserai for Persian merchants, another for Chinese traders, another specifically for those dealing in textiles, another for those carrying gems and precious metals. These specialized institutions develop their own cultures, their own networks of trust and information, and a merchant who is accepted into the right caravanserais gains access to opportunities and partnerships that would otherwise remain invisible. As you travel along the Silk Road, you develop favorites, caravanserais you look forward to, where the keeper remembers you from previous journeys, where you have friends among the regular visitors, where the food is particularly good, or the sleeping alcoves particularly comfortable. These places become landmarks in your mental map of the road, points of light in the vast distances between cities. You also learn which caravanserais to avoid, which have bad water or dishonest keepers, or are located in areas where theft is common. This knowledge is part of the essential education of a Silk Road merchant, accumulated gradually through experience and through conversations with other travelers, passed down through generations of trading families. The caravanserai is also where cultures truly mix and interact. In a single courtyard, you might find Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Zoroastrians, and followers of older faiths all sheltering together. You might hear a dozen languages spoken, see a dozen different styles of dress and behavior. People from civilizations that have never directly contacted each other meet in these neutral spaces and discover their common humanity. Prejudices exist, of course, and sometimes tensions flare, but generally the practical needs of survival create a kind of enforced tolerance. Everyone needs water, everyone needs shelter, everyone needs to rest, and the caravanserai provides these things to all without distinction of faith or origin. It is in the caravanserais that you truly understand the Silk Road as a living system, a vast network of human connection that transcends any single empire or culture. The goods you carry are important, and the profits you hope to make are what drive you forward. But the real miracle of the Silk Road is this. It has created a space where people from the most distant parts of the known world can meet on relatively equal terms, can communicate despite language barriers, can trade and share and learn from each other. The caravanserai, that simple fortified rest house, is the physical embodiment of this miracle, the stage on which the great drama of cultural exchange is performed every night in hundreds of locations along thousands of miles of ancient roads. After weeks or months of travel, after the desert and the mountains and the endless nights in caravanserais, you finally approach one of the great trading cities of the Silk Road. The excitement in the caravan is palpable. This is what the journey has been for. This is where the transformation of goods into profit will finally occur or fail to occur. The city appears first as a smudge on the horizon, then as a suggestion of walls and towers, then finally in all its reality, a concentration of human civilization that seems miraculous after so long in wilderness and small settlements. Let us say the city is Samarkand, though it could as easily be Kashgar or Bukhara or Merv or any of the great market centers. You see first the walls, massive structures of mud, brick and stone rising from the plain, pierced by great gates where guards check documents and collect entry taxes. The caravan waits its turn in a line of other travelers, and you have time to observe the incredible variety of humanity flowing in and out of the city. There are Chinese merchants in silk robes, Sogdian traders in practical traveling clothes, Arabs in flowing white garments, Persians with elaborate turbans, Indians wearing bright colors, Mongols in leather and fur. The languages being spoken around you form an incomprehensible symphony, and you realize that this is the sound of the world meeting itself, of distant cultures converging in this single point of contact. The entry process is bureaucratic but efficient. Officials examine your goods, assess their value, calculate the taxes and duties you owe. You pay in the local currency, or in small silver coins that are accepted everywhere along the Silk Road. You are given a receipt, a piece of paper with official seals that you must keep carefully, for it proves you have paid your entry taxes and protects you from further demands. The officials are practiced and professional, having seen every type of good and every type of merchant. They can spot concealed merchandise with a glance, can estimate values with practiced ease, and while they can be bribed to reduce assessments, the bribes must be offered carefully and in the proper manner, for an insult to an official can result in confiscation of goods or expulsion from the city. Once through the gate, you enter a different world. The city is overwhelming in its density and activity. Streets narrow and winding, packed with people and animals, lined with shops and stalls selling everything imaginable. The noise is constant, a roar of voices haggling and calling, of animals braying and bells ringing, of hammers striking metal and looms clicking. The smells are intense and varied, spices and perfumes mixing with less pleasant odors of human waste and animal dung and cooking food and tanning leather. After the emptiness of desert and mountain, the sheer concentration of humanity is almost difficult to bear. Your first destination is the urban caravanserai appropriate to merchants of your type. These are usually located in specific quarters of the city, and finding them requires either prior knowledge or asking directions from locals. The caravanserai you enter is vast, a complex of buildings around multiple courtyards, capable of housing hundreds of merchants and thousands of animals. You claim a space, unload your goods with even more care than usual, for in a city theft is a greater danger than in the open road. You hire local guards if you can afford them, men whose job is simply to sit near your goods and prevent anyone from approaching them. With your merchandise secured, you begin the real work of being a merchant. You need to understand the local market, to learn what goods are in demand and what prices they command, to identify potential buyers and to assess their reliability and wealth. This intelligence gathering is done carefully and gradually. You visit the Great Bazaar, the central market where goods from across the known world are displayed and sold. You walk through sections devoted to textiles, to spices, to metals, to gems, to ceramics, to books, to weapons, to every category of trade good. You observe prices but do not yet reveal what you carry. You listen to conversations, trying to understand the local economic conditions, whether this is a moment of prosperity or hardship, whether certain goods are scarce or plentiful. You seek out merchants from your home region, people who speak your language and understand your cultural context. These fellow countrymen can provide invaluable information and introductions. They know which local merchants are honest and which are not, which money changers offer fair rates and which cheat, where the best sleeping quarters can be found, which officials must be bribed and how much to offer. This network of expatriate merchants is essential to doing business in foreign cities, and you understand now why your father insisted you maintain good relationships with the merchant community back home, for those relationships extend far beyond the city walls through these chains of connection and mutual obligation. The language barrier is real, but not insurmountable. Most major trading cities have populations of interpreters, men and sometimes women who speak multiple languages and hire themselves out to facilitate negotiations. You engage an interpreter who speaks your language and the local tongue, but you are careful, for interpreters can be honest brokers, or they can be agents of the sellers, subtly influencing negotiations in ways that benefit those who pay them additional fees. The best interpreters are those recommended by trusted sources, and you pay them well to ensure their loyalty, at least for the duration of your business in this city. When you are ready to begin actual selling, you do not simply set up a stall and display your goods. That is the method of small traders. As a merchant who has traveled the Silk Road, you deal in quantities and qualities that require a different approach. You send word through intermediaries to the major buyers in the city, the wealthy merchants and the agents of noble houses and royal courts. You let it be known, discreetly, that you have arrived with goods of exceptional quality, that you are willing to negotiate with serious buyers, that interested parties should make appointments to view your merchandise. The first serious potential buyer arrives at your caravanserai lodging in the afternoon. He is a local merchant, a man of obvious wealth judging by his clothes and the quality of his servant's livery. He is accompanied by his interpreter, his accountant, and several assistants. You welcome him with the formal courtesy that such negotiations require, offering tea and sweets, exchanging pleasantries about the journey, expressing admiration for the beauty of his city. Only after this ritual of hospitality do you begin to discuss business. You unveil a selection of your silk, unrolling the bolts to display their quality in good light. The merchant examines them carefully, running the fabric through his fingers, holding it up to the sun to check the tightness of the weave, looking for any flaws or irregularities. His face remains neutral, revealing nothing of his thoughts. This is the beginning of a dance of negotiation that might last for hours or even days, a careful game where both parties try to assess value and intention while revealing as little as possible about their own positions. He makes his first offer. It is insultingly low, perhaps a third of what you know the silk is worth. You do not show offense but simply smile and shake your head. You explain the exceptional quality of the silk, the tightness of the weave, the purity of the dye, the reputation of the workshops where it was produced. You mention casually that other buyers have expressed interest. You do not name a counterprice but instead offer more tea and suggest that perhaps he would like to examine the goods more carefully. The negotiation continues in this manner, each side making moves and countermoves, prices gradually converging towards some middle ground. The process is complicated by the need to agree not just on price but on currency and payment method. He offers to pay in local coins, but you know these coins are sometimes debased, containing less silver than their face value suggests. You prefer payment in either pure silver by weight or in trade goods that you can carry to the next city. He suggests a mixture, part payment in coins, part in trade goods. You must now assess the value of what he offers in trade, carpets and local textiles and some copper work, judging whether you can sell these items profitably in your next destination. The negotiation is also a test of will and patience. The merchant who seems most desperate will get the worst deal, so both sides maintain an appearance of calm indifference, as if this particular transaction matters little, as if either party could walk away without regret. But beneath this surface calm you are calculating intensely. You know what you paid for the silk, you know what expenses you have incurred in transporting it, you know what profit margin you need to make the entire journey worthwhile. He knows or thinks he knows what he can sell the silk for in his local market and what profit he needs. The challenge is to find a price that allows both parties to profit, or at least to feel they have not been cheated. After several hours of discussion, you reach an agreement. The price is less than you hoped, but more than you feared. Payment will be half in silver coin, which you will have weighed and assayed to verify its purity, and half in a selection of carpets which he assures you are of the finest quality. You shake hands or clasp arms, or perform whatever gesture of agreement is customary in this culture. Your interpreter and his accountant draw up a contract in duplicate, specifying exactly what has been agreed, witnessed by both parties, and by independent witnesses. The contract is written in 2 languages, to prevent any later misunderstanding. The actual transfer of goods happens under careful supervision. Your silk is counted and examined once more. His silver is weighed on scales you have brought for this purpose, for you trust no one's scales but your own. The carpets he provides are examined, roll by roll. Each item is checked off against the contract. When everything is verified, the goods change hands. You have made your first sale in this city, converted a portion of your cargo into local goods and currency. You feel a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. The silk that you have carried across desert and mountain has finally fulfilled its purpose, has been transformed from mere cloth into wealth. But you are not finished. You have other goods to sell, and you have goods to buy, for a merchant does not make the return journey with empty packs. You spend the next days and weeks negotiating other deals, selling your spices to merchants who specialize in that trade, disposing of the smaller items you carried. Each negotiation is unique. Each buyer has different preferences and different negotiating styles. You learn to adapt, to read people, to sense when to push for a better price and when to accept what is offered. Simultaneously, you are shopping for goods to carry home or to the next city on your route. You need items that are valuable and portable, that will survive the journey, that will be in demand in your destination. You examine jade with a jeweler's eye, looking for the right color and translucency, checking for hidden cracks. You smell and taste spices that are local to this region, judging their freshness and purity. You examine metalwork and ceramics, looking for items that combine beauty with durability. You negotiate for these purchases with the same care you used in your sales, for to buy poorly is as damaging as to sell poorly. The money changing is its own specialized skill. The Silk Road operates on a bewildering variety of currencies, and in any major city, dozens of different coins circulate simultaneously. There are Chinese cash coins with square holes, Roman and Byzantine gold solidi, Persian dirhams, local copper and silver coins of varying purity and value. You must understand the relative values of all these currencies and how they fluctuate. Money changers sit in the bazaar with scales and reference tables, and they make their profit from the spread between buying and selling prices, and from their superior knowledge of currency values. You negotiate with money changers as carefully as with any other merchant, for a poor exchange rate can eat away at your profits. Letters of credit begin to appear in more sophisticated markets, instruments that allow a merchant to deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another, avoiding the risk of carrying large amounts of coin. These early forms of banking require trust and established networks, usually operating within ethnic or religious communities, where reputation matters and where there are mechanisms for enforcing agreements across vast distances. If you have the right connections, you can use these instruments to move wealth more safely than carrying physical currency, though you pay fees for this service. Throughout your time in the city, you are also gathering information for future journeys. You learn about new markets opening in distant regions, about changes in supply and demand, about political developments that might affect trade routes. You hear stories from merchants arriving from directions you have never traveled, and these stories become the seeds of future plans. Perhaps there is profit to be made by extending your journey farther east or west, by exploring routes you have not yet traveled. The world revealed through these conversations is larger and more complex than you ever imagined, full of opportunities and dangers you are only beginning to understand. Your evenings in the city are spent in the caravanserais, and in the homes of expatriate merchants, sharing meals and conversation, building relationships that may prove valuable in future years. These social gatherings are also business, for trust between merchants is built through repeated interaction, through shared meals and shared stories, through the slow accumulation of mutual respect and demonstrated reliability. You tell edited versions of your journey, emphasizing your competence and your good fortune, downplaying your fears and your mistakes. You listen to the advice of elder merchants, men who have made this journey dozens of times, whose knowledge and experience are freely shared within the community of traders. The cities themselves are marvels worth exploring. When you have time between negotiations, you walk through neighborhoods where crafts are practiced, watching silk weavers at their looms, metal workers at their forges, potters at their wheels. You visit the great mosques or temples or churches, magnificent buildings that demonstrate the wealth and sophistication of these urban centers. You eat in tea houses and restaurants, tasting local cuisines that are exotic and strange, some delicious and some difficult for your palate. You watch street performers and listen to musicians. You observe local customs and festivals. You try to understand how people live in this place so different from your home. But always beneath the surface activity and the cultural exploration, your mind is on business. You are calculating profit and loss, planning your next moves, deciding whether to continue along this route or to turn back, whether to invest your profits in more goods or to convert everything to portable wealth and begin the journey home. These decisions are complex, influenced by seasonal factors, political conditions, market intelligence, and simple intuition. This is the art of the merchant, to make these judgments with incomplete information, to take calculated risks, to balance ambition with caution. When your business in the city is finally concluded, when you have sold what you brought and bought what you will carry forward, you prepare once more for departure. You have spent perhaps a month in this city, perhaps two, and in that time it has become somewhat familiar. You know certain streets and certain shops. You have made acquaintances if not quite friends. But the road calls, and a merchant's life is one of constant motion. You load your newly purchased goods onto your animals, settle your accounts with the caravanserai keeper, and wait for your caravan to form. And then once more you pass through the city gates, leaving the concentration of humanity behind, heading back into the vastness of the Silk Road with new goods and new knowledge, continuing your journey toward the next destination, the next market, the next chapter of this immense adventure. The Silk Road's reputation for danger is not exaggerated. For every merchant who completes the journey and returns wealthy, there are others who disappear entirely, their fate unknown, their goods lost, their families left with debt and uncertainty. The dangers come in many forms, some sudden and violent, others slow and insidious. You travel with this knowledge always present in your mind, a weight that never entirely lifts, a calculation that colors every decision. Bandits are the most obvious threat, and they operate all along the route in varying degrees of organization and sophistication. In some regions, they are desperate men driven to robbery by poverty, disorganized and relatively easy to deter with a show of force. In other regions, they are professional criminals, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, operating from strongholds in the mountains, striking caravans with military precision. The worst are those who have political connections or who operate in regions where local authorities are weak or corrupt, for these bandits enjoy a kind of immunity, confident they will face no consequences for their actions. The guards you have hired exist primarily as deterrents. A caravan with a dozen armed men is a harder target than one with no protection, and bandits, being rational in their own brutal way, will often choose to attack softer targets. But you harbor no illusions about what would happen if a large and determined group of bandits decided to attack your caravan. The guards might fight, or they might simply flee, having calculated that their pay is not worth dying for. In such a situation, your survival would depend on the bandits' intentions. Some simply want goods and will let merchants go free after stripping them of their cargo. Others kill witnesses to prevent identification. There is no way to know in advance which type you might encounter. The caravan bashi's route choices are partly determined by bandit activity. He knows which passes are currently infested, which stretches of road are relatively safe, which regions require traveling in larger groups or paying protection money to local strongmen who control territories. Sometimes the protection money is explicitly demanded, officials or unofficial leaders making clear that a payment is required for safe passage. Other times it is disguised as official tolls or taxes, collected by men in something approximating uniforms, representing authorities that may or may not be legitimate. You pay these fees because the alternative is worse, though each payment reduces your profit margin and reminds you of your vulnerability. One night, the reality of bandit danger becomes immediate rather than theoretical. Your caravan is camped in a narrow valley, one of those unavoidable locations where the terrain offers little choice. The attack comes at the darkest hour before dawn, when most people are in their deepest sleep. You wake to shouting and the clash of weapons. Men are running through the camp, dark figures barely visible in the dying firelight. You grab your knife and crawl to where your most valuable goods are stored, prepared to defend them with your life if necessary. The fight is chaotic and terrifying. You hear screams, the sound of metal on metal, horses neighing in panic, something whistles past your head, an arrow or thrown stone. You crouch behind your cargo, heart pounding, gripping your knife, prepared to strike at anyone who approaches. But the attack is focused elsewhere, on the wealthier merchants whose goods are more obvious and more valuable. The guards are fighting. You can hear them, but you cannot tell if they are winning or losing. And then, as suddenly as it began, it is over. The attackers withdraw, vanishing into the darkness from which they came. Dawn reveals the cost. 2 merchants are dead, their throats cut, several others are wounded. A substantial amount of cargo is missing, including all of one merchant's goods, leaving him financially ruined. 3 camels were killed or stolen. The mood in the camp is grim as you break camp and move on, for there is nothing to be done but continue. There is no local authority to appeal to, no justice to be sought. This is simply the cost of traveling the Silk Road, a cost sometimes paid in blood. Disease is perhaps an even greater danger than bandits, for it can spread through a caravan like wildfire, killing without mercy or discrimination. You have seen outbreaks of fever that leave men burning hot and delirious, that kill half the people who contract them. You have seen dysentery turn strong men into weakened husks in a matter of days. You have seen respiratory infections spread from person to person until nearly everyone is coughing, some recovering and some slowly drowning in their own fluids. The crowded conditions in caravanserais facilitate disease transmission. You sleep in close quarters with dozens of strangers, share water sources and cooking areas, breathe the same air. If someone arrives already sick, the disease will spread before its presence is even recognized. Some diseases you know by name and reputation, others are mysterious, striking without warning, following no pattern you can discern. You carry what medicines you know, herbs and tinctures that sometimes help and sometimes do nothing. You pray to whatever gods you believe in and hope that your constitution is strong enough to survive if disease strikes. When someone in your caravan falls seriously ill, the decision about what to do is agonizing. If you are near a city, they might be left behind to recover or die in the care of local healers or religious institutions. But in the empty stretches between cities, there are no good options. The caravan cannot wait indefinitely for someone to recover, for delays mean running out of supplies, missing seasonal windows for crossing mountain passes, losing profit to time, and yet to leave someone behind in the wilderness is to condemn them to death. The caravan bashi makes these decisions with the cold calculation that survival requires, and you try not to think too deeply about what you would want done if you were the one lying fevered and helpless. Political instability presents another category of danger. The Silk Road passes through multiple empires and kingdoms, through regions of stable rule and regions of chaos. Border conflicts can close routes suddenly, leaving caravans trapped or forced to take longer, more dangerous alternative paths. Civil wars can make entire regions impassable. Changes of dynasty can mean new rulers who impose confiscatory taxes or who simply seize merchant goods as spoils of war. You try to stay informed about political conditions, but information travels slowly, and by the time you hear about a crisis, you may already be committed to a route that leads straight into it. You experience this firsthand when you arrive at a city you have visited before, expecting to do business as usual, only to find the gates closed and soldiers on the walls. The city is under siege. You learn from refugees camping outside the walls, caught up in a war between rival claimants to the regional throne. There is no entering the city, no accessing the markets you had counted on. You are forced to turn around and seek an alternative destination. Weeks of travel wasted, your profit calculations completely disrupted. This is the risk of long-distance trade, that the world can change while you are traveling through it, that plans made months ago can become irrelevant in an instant. Natural disasters strike without warning and without mercy. You are traveling through a region of low hills when the earth suddenly lurches beneath your feet. It is an earthquake, and for a terrifying moment, the ground itself seems unreliable. Rocks tumble down hillsides. Your camels panic, pulling at their leads, threatening to scatter. The shaking lasts perhaps 30 seconds, though it feels much longer. When it stops, you discover that part of the trail ahead has collapsed, a section of hillside simply gone, sliding down into a ravine. The caravan must detour, picking a new path through difficult terrain, losing days and risking more disasters. Flash floods in the desert are another danger you learn about through experience. The sky might be completely clear where you stand, but rain falling in distant mountains sends walls of water rushing down dry wodas without warning. You lose a camel to such a flood, the animal caught in the wrong place when the water arrives, swept away before anyone can react. The loss is not just financial but practical, for now you must redistribute the load among your remaining animals, pushing them harder, knowing that they are now closer to their limits. The psychological toll of constant danger is difficult to explain to those who have never experienced it. You are never entirely safe, never able to completely relax. Even in the great cities, even behind walls with guards posted, there is always some risk. This constant low-level stress wears on you, makes you suspicious and cautious, changes the way you see the world. You assess everyone you meet as a potential threat or ally. You calculate risks constantly. You plan escape routes even in apparently safe situations. This is part of the price of the merchant's life, a price paid not in coins but in peace of mind. And yet, despite all the dangers, despite the deaths and losses and constant fear, merchants continue to travel the Silk Road. They continue because the potential rewards justify the risks, because the profits from a successful journey can transform a family's fortune, because the alternative of staying home and living safely but poorly is less appealing than the dream of wealth earned through courage and endurance. You are part of this ancient tradition, this endless stream of brave or desperate or ambitious people willing to risk everything to carry goods across the roof of the world. And as you continue your journey, surviving each danger and moving on to face the next, you begin to understand that you are tougher than you knew, more resilient, more capable of enduring hardship. This knowledge, this confidence born of survival, is itself a kind of wealth, valuable in ways that have nothing to do with silk or silver. Yet the Silk Road is not merely a highway of goods and dangers. It is also, perhaps most importantly, a conduit of ideas, beliefs, and innovations. The merchants who travel these routes carry more than physical cargo. They carry stories, techniques, religious concepts, scientific knowledge, artistic styles, and ways of understanding the world. The cultural exchange that happens along the Silk Road is gradual and often unintentional, but its impact on human civilization is profound and lasting. You witness this exchange in countless small ways during your journey. In the caravanserais at night, when merchants from different lands share their meals and their stories, you hear about customs and beliefs that are foreign to your understanding. The Buddhist merchant from China describes the concept of karma and reincarnation, the idea that actions in this life determine the conditions of the next. It is a completely different way of understanding morality and justice than anything in your own religious tradition, and while you do not convert to his faith, the concept lodges in your mind, becoming part of your mental furniture, influencing how you think about cause and effect. A Persian merchant introduces you to the poetry of his homeland, reciting verses in his language and then translating them into the trade language you share. The poetry speaks of love and loss, and the beauty of fleeting moments, and though the sensibilities are different from your own culture's literary traditions, you recognize the universal human emotions beneath the foreign words. You ask him to write down one of the poems, and you carry that scrap of paper with you, occasionally taking it out and trying to memorize the sounds of the words, even though you do not fully understand them. You travel for a time with a group that includes Christian monks heading toward the east, missionaries, hoping to spread their faith in distant lands. They carry with them not just religious texts but also knowledge of medicine developed in Byzantine monasteries, techniques for preserving food, methods of keeping accurate records, In evening conversations, they share some of this knowledge freely, explaining herbal remedies for common ailments, demonstrating how to make ink from certain plants, teaching methods of basic surgery that they learned in monastery hospitals. This practical knowledge is as valuable as any trade good, and you absorb it eagerly, knowing it might save your life or the lives of your companions. The movement of religious ideas along the Silk Road has been happening for centuries before your journey and will continue for centuries after. Buddhism traveled from India through Central Asia to China, carried by monks and merchants who saw no contradiction between spiritual enlightenment and commercial profit. Christianity spread eastward from the Mediterranean, reaching as far as China in the form of Nestorian communities that adapted their faith to new cultural contexts. Islam expanded rapidly along the trade routes carried by Arab merchants whose faith was inseparable from their commercial activities. Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, Judaism, and countless local religious traditions all move along these routes, mixing and influencing each other in ways that create new syncretic forms of belief. You see the evidence of this religious interchange in the cities you visit. In Samarkand, you find mosques and Christian churches and Buddhist temples and Zoroastrian fire temples all within the same city walls. People of different faiths live side by side, sometimes in harmony and sometimes in tension, but generally with a practical tolerance born of commercial necessity. A city that excludes merchants of different religions is a city that cuts itself off from profitable trade, and practical considerations often outweigh religious absolutism in the pragmatic culture of the Silk Road cities. The exchange of technological knowledge is perhaps less obvious, but equally important. You learn from Chinese merchants about the existence of paper, a writing material far superior to the parchment or papyrus used in the West. Paper is cheaper to produce, easier to transport, and more versatile in its applications. You watch in fascination as a merchant demonstrates the process of papermaking, creating a sheet from pulp plant fibers. This technology will eventually spread westward, carried by merchants and craftsmen who recognize its value, and it will transform literacy and record-keeping throughout the world. You hear rumors of other Chinese innovations, a black powder that explodes when ignited, potentially useful for mining or warfare, a device with a magnetized needle that always points north, making navigation more reliable, printing techniques using carved wooden blocks that can reproduce text and images much faster than hand copying. These technologies are still largely confined to China, guarded as valuable secrets, but information about them leaks out through traveling merchants, and eventually, through a process of description and experimentation, they will be recreated in other regions. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge also travels the Silk Road, Indian numerals, and the concept of zero move westward, revolutionizing calculation and mathematics. Greek geometric principles move eastward, Persian astronomical tables, synthesizing knowledge from multiple traditions, become reference works used across multiple empires. Medical knowledge from different traditions mingles, with doctors comparing notes on treatments for various diseases, sharing knowledge about medicinal plants and surgical techniques, gradually building a more comprehensive understanding of human health that draws on the accumulated wisdom of multiple civilizations. Artistic styles and techniques flow both ways along the Silk Road. The distinctive blue glaze used in Persian pottery is copied by Chinese ceramicists, who add their own innovations to create new styles. Chinese silk weaving techniques influence textile production in Central Asia and Persia. Painting styles, sculptural forms, architectural motifs, musical instruments, and decorative patterns all travel with the merchants, inspiring local artists to experiment with foreign forms and creating hybrid styles that combine elements from multiple traditions. The cuisine you experience in different cities shows clear evidence of this cultural exchange. Spices from India have become essential to Persian cooking. Noodles, a Chinese innovation, have spread westward and been adapted to local tastes. Tea, originally a Chinese drink, is becoming popular in Central Asian cities, prepared in local styles with milk or butter or salt. Dried fruits from Central Asia are prized in Chinese markets. This exchange of ingredients and cooking methods gradually transforms the cuisines of every region the Silk Road touches, adding complexity and variety to human diet. Language itself evolves through the constant contact between different linguistic communities. New words are borrowed to describe foreign goods and concepts. Sogdian becomes a lingua franca precisely because Sogdian merchants are so active along the Silk Road, and their language absorbs vocabulary from Persian, Chinese, Turkish, and other sources, becoming a hybrid tongue designed for commercial communication. You find yourself speaking a simplified version of multiple languages, a trade pidgin that allows basic communication even when no one shares a native language. The genetic interchange is less visible but equally real. Merchants sometimes marry in the cities where they settle, creating families that bridge different ethnic groups. Women sometimes travel with caravans, either as merchants in their own right or as family members of merchants. Children born along the Silk Road often have mixed ancestry, and over generations this creates populations whose physical appearance reflects the mixing of distant bloodlines. The cities of the Silk Road become cosmopolitan not just in culture but in biology, their populations literally embodying the connections between distant regions. You yourself contribute to this cultural exchange, perhaps without fully realizing it. When you return home, you will bring back not just goods but stories, ideas, and knowledge. You will describe the cities you have seen, the customs you have observed, the people you have met. Your descriptions will influence how your community thinks about the distant world. The goods you sell will expose your customers to foreign styles and tastes, subtly changing their preferences and expectations. If you teach your children the trade, you will pass on not just commercial knowledge, but also the broader understanding that the world is larger and more diverse than any single culture, that different peoples have developed different but equally valid ways of living. This aspect of the Silk Road, the exchange of culture and ideas, is perhaps its most lasting legacy. Empires rise and fall, trade routes shift, but the knowledge and cultural forms that spread along the Silk Road become permanently embedded in the civilizations they touch. The world is forever changed by this contact, made richer and more complex, and you are privileged to be a small part of this vast historical process, a single thread in the enormous tapestry of human connection. Years pass in the rhythm of the road. What began as a single journey becomes a life, a career, an identity.
You are no longer simply a merchant who travels.
You are a traveler, a man of the road, someone defined by movement and distance, and the constant negotiation between home and elsewhere. The initial excitement of the first journey has given way to something more complex, a mixture of weariness and expertise, of homesickness and restlessness, of pride in what you have achieved and doubt about what you have sacrificed. The journey home is paradoxically harder than the journey out. When you departed, you were sustained by anticipation, by the excitement of the unknown, by the hope of profit. The return journey carries a different weight. You know now what lies ahead, every difficult pass and waterless stretch. The novelty is gone, replaced by tedious familiarity, and yet you push forward because home waits, because family waits, because the entire purpose of the journey was to return with wealth and honor. You have been away for perhaps 3 years, perhaps 4, perhaps longer. Time loses its usual structure on the Silk Road, measured not by calendar months but by seasons suitable for crossing deserts or mountains, by the timing of markets and festivals, by the slow accumulation of traded goods and gathered profits. You sent letters home when opportunity allowed, brief messages carried by other merchants heading in that direction, but you have received few replies. For the chance intersection of a messenger heading toward you in the vastness of the Silk Road is rare and unreliable. The goods you carry homeward are different from those you carried out. You have converted your original cargo through multiple transactions, each one changing the character of your wealth. The silk you brought east was sold for silver and local goods. Those goods were carried to another city and traded for jade and precious stones. Those items were sold for gold and spices. At each transaction you made judgments about what would retain value, what would be transportable, what would find markets in your home city. The wealth you now carry is concentrated and portable, the distillation of years of trading, and you guard it with obsessive care. Your body shows the wear of the journey. You have lost weight, your frame hardened by constant travel and simple food. Your skin is weathered, darkened by sun and wind, marked by small scars from the countless minor injuries that accumulate over years of rough living. Your hands are calloused, strong from handling ropes and loads. You have aged in ways that go beyond years, your face showing lines that speak of hardship and worry, and the constant vigilance that becomes second nature. When you look at your reflection in a still pool of water, you sometimes barely recognize the person looking back. Your companions on the journey have changed multiple times. Some merchants you met in the first weeks are still with you, and with them you have forged bonds that feel as strong as kinship. You have saved each other's lives, shared food during times of scarcity, comforted each other through illness and grief. But others have departed at various cities, concluding their journeys or heading in different directions. Some died along the way, their bones left in unmarked graves in distant places. You have picked up new companions as well, merchants who joined the caravan at various points, bringing their own stories and expertise. The return through the mountains is as difficult as you remember. Your animals are tired now, nearing the end of their endurance. One of your camels dies during a high pass, simply collapsing and refusing to rise again, and you must abandon some goods you had hoped to bring home. This loss is heartbreaking after carrying them so far, but there is no alternative. The remaining animals cannot carry more than they already bear. The desert crossing on the return seems longer, hotter, more desolate than it did on the outward journey. You know now what awaits, and that knowledge does not make it easier. You dream of water, of shade, of rest, but each day brings only more sand and heat and the slow, grinding progress of laden camels. The oases, when you reach them, are no longer exciting discoveries but merely temporary respites from suffering, islands of endurance in an ocean of hardship. But gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the landscape begins to change back into something familiar. You recognize certain landmarks, mountains you saw on your outward journey, river valleys you remember. The plants and animals become those of your homeland. The people you encounter begin to look more familiar, their features and clothing echoing those of your own culture. You are entering the final stage of your return, and the anticipation builds like a pressure in your chest. You reach the city from which you departed years ago. Standing outside its walls as the sun rises, you are struck by how both familiar and strange it seems. These are streets you walked as a younger man, buildings you have known all your life, and yet after years of seeing other cities, your hometown appears different, smaller perhaps, or simply one city among many rather than the center of the world. You enter through the gate where you departed so long ago, and the guards do not recognize you, for you are no longer the man who left. Your family has been notified of your approach, word having been sent ahead by faster riders. They wait at your home, and when you arrive, the reunion is overwhelming. Your mother weeps, touching your face as if to confirm you are real. Your father examines you with a mixture of pride and concern, seeing the changes the journey has made. Your siblings crowd around, asking questions, reaching out to touch you, amazed that you have returned. If you left a wife or children, their joy is even more intense, years of separation collapsing into embraces and tears. The goods you have brought back must be unloaded, secured, and eventually sold or distributed. Your father helps you with this, his expertise guiding the final transactions that will convert your portable wealth back into local currency and goods. The accounting takes days, a careful reckoning of what you invested, what you spent, what you lost, and what you have brought back. When the calculation is complete, you discover that you have made a profit, not a spectacular fortune, but a solid return that has perhaps doubled or tripled the capital your family invested. You are successful. You have done what you set out to do. The community celebrates your return. Other merchants who have made similar journeys welcome you into their ranks with new respect. You are no longer an apprentice or a hopeful youth, but a proven merchant, someone who has faced the Silk Road and returned. Young merchants seek your advice, asking about routes and markets and the practicalities of survival. You answer their questions, sharing knowledge as it was once shared with you, perpetuating the tradition. But you also struggle with the return. After years of constant movement, of sleeping in tents and caravanserais, of measuring progress by the daily advance of laden camels, the stillness of home feels strange. You wake in the night disoriented, expecting to hear camel bells and the voices of guards, finding instead only the quiet sounds of the city sleeping. You miss certain companions, merchants you traveled with who continued on to other destinations, or who decided to settle in distant cities. You miss, strangely, even some of the hardships, for they gave your life a clarity of purpose that feels absent in the comfortable routine of home. You tell stories of your journey, but you find that it is difficult to convey the reality of what you experienced. The distances are too vast, the landscapes too alien, the dangers too extreme. Your listeners hear your words, but cannot truly comprehend what it means to cross a waterless desert, to climb passes where the air is too thin to breathe properly, to watch companions die and then continue traveling because to stop is to die as well. The journey becomes a story, something that happened to you but which now feels distant, like something you read about rather than lived through. And yet the experience has changed you permanently. You see your home city through different eyes now, aware of its place in a larger world, conscious of the goods and ideas and people that flow through it from distant places. You understand commerce in ways you never could have without experiencing the full complexity of long-distance trade. You speak several languages now, can navigate by the stars, can judge the quality of goods with expert eyes, can negotiate in multiple cultural contexts. These skills define you, make you valuable to your community, set you apart from those who have never traveled beyond familiar horizons. You must decide whether to make another journey. The Silk Road calls to you with a strange pull, a mixture of dread and longing. Part of you never wants to face those hardships again, never wants to sleep on cold ground or ration water in the desert, or risk death in mountain passes. But another part of you is restless at home, missing the clarity of purpose that comes from traveling toward a destination, missing the camaraderie of the road, missing even the dangers that made you feel intensely alive. The decision weighs on you through the months of your homecoming, and eventually you begin to prepare for another departure, because you have become someone who cannot remain still, someone defined by the road rather than by the places at either end of it. The legacy of the Silk Road extends far beyond the individual lives of the merchants who traveled it. This network of routes, connecting civilizations from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, operating for more than 1,000 years, fundamentally shaped human history in ways that are still visible today. The cities that grew up along these routes became centers of learning and culture, crossroads, where ideas from multiple traditions met and mingled. The goods that moved along these highways transformed economies and cultures, making available luxuries and necessities that would otherwise have remained locked in their regions of origin. The Silk Road was never a single road, but a complex network of routes that shifted over time in response to political conditions, climate changes, and economic opportunities. Some routes were more important at certain periods. Others fell into disuse or were rediscovered. The northern routes through the steppes, the central routes through the oases of the Tarim Basin, the southern routes through the mountains and valleys of the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas. These various paths were chosen by merchants based on their calculations of safety, speed, and potential profit. The great age of the Silk Road eventually came to an end, though the process was gradual rather than sudden. The development of maritime routes during the age of exploration provided alternatives that were often faster and safer than the overland journey. The rise and fall of various empires along the route created political barriers or opportunities that shifted trade patterns. The Mongol peace of the 13th and 14th centuries created a brief golden age of overland trade, but the fragmentation that followed made the routes more dangerous and less profitable. By the 16th century, the importance of the overland Silk Road had declined significantly, though some trade continued for centuries more. Today, the physical traces of the Silk Road remain visible for those who know where to look. The ruins of caravanserais still stand in deserts and mountains, their walls slowly crumbling but their basic structure recognizable. The great trading cities like Samarkand and Bukhara and Kashgar retain their magnificent architecture, mosques and madrasas and mausoleums that speak of the wealth that once flowed through these places. Archaeological sites along the route continue to yield artifacts that tell the story of this ancient trade: fragments of silk and pottery, coins from multiple empires, documents in various languages describing transactions and travels. The cultural legacy is perhaps even more significant. The religions that spread along the Silk Road, the artistic styles that developed through cross-cultural contact, the technologies that moved from one civilization to another, the foods and languages and customs that were transformed through interaction, all of these continue to shape the modern world. When you use paper, when you taste a dish flavored with spices from distant lands, when you see artwork that shows influences from multiple traditions, you are experiencing the legacy of the Silk Road merchants who carried these elements across continents over many centuries. The merchants themselves are mostly forgotten as individuals. Unlike kings and generals, they left few monuments or written records. Their names, with rare exceptions like Marco Polo, have vanished into history. But collectively, They were among the most important figures in human civilization, the people who built bridges between cultures, who risked everything to carry goods and ideas across the greatest barriers the world could present, who proved that human ingenuity and determination could overcome deserts and mountains and vast distances. In the end, the story of the Silk Road is a story about connection, about the fundamental human drive to reach beyond familiar boundaries, to seek opportunity in distant places, to trade with strangers who become partners and sometimes friends. It is a story about the transformative power of commerce, which is never just about buying and selling but about all the human interactions that commercial exchange entails. It is a story about courage and greed, wisdom and folly, about people who chose the hard path because they believed in the possibility of a better future. And now, as we reach the end of our journey together, as the last miles fall behind us and the destination finally appears on the horizon, take a moment to reflect on what you have experienced. You have walked through deserts where the sun scorches and the nights freeze. You have climbed mountains where the air itself seems hostile to life. You have slept in caravanserais with strangers who became companions. You have negotiated in bazaars where languages mixed and cultures met. You have faced bandits and disease and disaster. You have survived, and in surviving, you have become something more than you were when you started. The goods you carried have been transformed through multiple exchanges, moving from one market to another, changing hands and changing forms, creating wealth at each step of the journey. But you have been transformed as well, educated by distance and diversity, hardened by difficulty, enriched by experience that goes far beyond the merely financial. You have seen the world in its vast complexity, its terrible beauty, its dangerous possibilities. You have learned that humans are fundamentally similar in their hopes and fears, even when they differ in language and custom. You have become a thread in the great tapestry of human connection, one of the countless individuals who together wove the fabric of civilization. As we bid farewell to the Silk Road, to its deserts and mountains and magnificent cities, to its dangers and opportunities, remember that this road was built not by emperors or armies, but by merchants like you, people motivated by profit and possibility, people willing to risk the journey because they believed the destination was worth reaching. Their courage and determination, their willingness to reach beyond what was safe and familiar, helped create the interconnected world we inhabit today. They walked so that we might understand that distance is not a barrier but a bridge, that difference is not a threat but an opportunity, that the unknown is not to be feared but to be explored. Thank you for walking this ancient path with me tonight. Thank you for enduring the hardships, for carrying your goods across impossible distances, for becoming, if only in imagination, a merchant of the Silk Road. Our story fades now like footprints in the sand, like the sound of camel bells disappearing into distance, like the last light fading from a caravanserai window as night settles over the road. But the echoes remain, the lessons learned, the understanding gained. Rest well, traveler. Dream of distant horizons, of routes not yet traveled, of markets waiting in cities whose names you have not yet learned. Until we meet again on another journey into the past, may you find safe passage and profitable trade in all your ventures. Sleep now, and let the noise of the modern world fade away into the comfortable darkness of well-earned rest.